The rain had been falling for 3 days without pause when the rider came to Rosalind Hale's door. She heard the hooves before she heard the knock, a hard, urgent rhythm on the wet cobbles outside. And she set down the jar she was wrapping without haste, because she had learned long ago that hurrying to answer a summons only told people they could summon you whenever they pleased. She opened the door and found a young groom on her step, his coat soaked black, his horse blowing steam into the gray afternoon air. He named the boy Thomas Winfield, 8 years old, the only surviving child of the Earl of Sedgwick, who had been feverish since Tuesday and had not improved under the Hall's housekeeper's care. Rosalind looked past the groom's shoulder toward the church at the end of the lane, where the river ran behind the low wall, and she could see even from here how high the water had climbed against the stone. It would flood the ford before morning. She knew that as certainly as she knew the smell of rain fever in a child's breath. She looked at the groom. She said she would come, but she would need to stay the night. She did not tell him she already knew she would need to stay longer than that. She packed her kit with the particular efficiency of a woman who has done this so many times the movements no longer required thought. The willow bark, the yarrow, the camphor cloth, the bottle of clear tincture she had drawn off that morning from the batch that had been steeping since the water sickness first appeared downriver 3 weeks ago. She had been watching the river for a fortnight. She'd been watching the mill dam upstream for nearly as long. She had been waiting, with the patience she had trained into herself through 4 years of solitary practice, for a reason to act. The boy's fever was that reason. She pulled on her riding coat, pinned her hat, and followed the groom out into the rain. The lane between Elmcroft and Sedgwick Hall was 4 miles of churned mud by the time she reached it, and the ford was already ankle-deep on her horse's legs when she crossed. The water ran fast and brown and cold around the animal's fetlocks, and Rosalind kept her eyes on the far bank rather than on the current, because looking at moving water while crossing it was something her late husband had told her never to do, and she had found in the years since his death that his practical advice continued to serve her long after the man himself had gone. She reached the far bank. She did not look back at the ford. Sedgwick Hall presented itself through the rain as a large, square-faced house of pale stone, its windows lit from within, a groom running out from the stable yard before she had even dismounted. She handed off her horse and walked through the front door. The housekeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Parrish, held it open with an expression that combined relief and reservation in approximately equal measure. The particular expression of a servant who has sent for help she is not entirely sure she wanted. "The boy is upstairs," Mrs. Parrish said. "His lordship has been with him most of the afternoon." "Take me up," Rosalind said. She was halfway up the staircase when the door at the top of it opened, and Marcus Winfield stepped into the corridor. He was taller than she had expected from the groom's description of a grieving father. She had expected someone diminished by worry, stooped with it, the way grief sometimes bent people down into themselves. He was not. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with a kind of face that did not give much away. And he looked at her with an attention that was neither welcoming nor hostile, but simply thorough. The way a man looks at something he needs to assess quickly and accurately. She looked back at him with the same quality of attention, and whatever each of them concluded in those few seconds, neither chose to share it. "Miss Hale," he said. "Lord Sedgwick," she replied. "Will you take me to the boy, please?" He stepped aside and opened the sick-room door without another word. Thomas Winfield lay in the center of a large bed, very small against its white pillows, his hair dark with sweat and his color high and wrong. That particular flush that Rosalind recognized as the fever working hard, the body mobilizing everything it had. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand to his forehead, then to his throat, then pressed gently at the glands below his jaw. The boy was half conscious, his breathing shallow, his lips dry. She opened her kit. "How long since he last took water?" she asked, without turning. "This morning," Marcus said. He was standing in the doorway. "He wouldn't take it again at noon." "He'll take it now," Rosalind said. "Bring a basin of cool water, not cold, not warm, and a cloth, and a cup of plain water, no additions." She heard him move away down the corridor. She heard him speak to someone, a brief instruction, quietly given, and then he came back himself, carrying the basin, with a maid behind him carrying the cup. Rosalind noted that he had not sent for the basin. He had fetched it himself. What followed was several hours that Rosalind could not have narrated in sequence afterward, because they merged into a continuous movement. The cloth, the water, the boy's temperature checked every quarter hour against the back of her wrist, the tincture measured into the cup and coaxed between Thomas's cracked lips in small sips. Marcus stayed. He did not pace, as she had half expected from a man who looked like someone who used movement to manage himself. He sat in the chair on the far side of the bed and held the basin when she needed both hands free. And they passed the cloth back and forth between them across the boy's sleeping form, without either of them commenting on it, without either of them pulling back when their fingers met in the middle of the pass. His hands were large and steady. Hers were smaller and faster. By the third hour, the exchange had settled into something like rhythm, like two people who had been doing this together for a long time, and neither of them remarked on that either. Near midnight, Thomas's breathing deepened into proper sleep. Rosalind sat back and pressed her fingers to the inside of her wrist to slow her own pulse. "The fever hasn't broken," she said, "but it's steadied. That's what I wanted tonight. He needs to hold through to morning." "And if he doesn't hold?" Marcus asked. Rosalind looked across the bed at him. His face in the candlelight was composed, but his jaw was set in a way that told her the composure was held in place by considerable effort. "He will," she said, "but I'll be here if he doesn't." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, and that was all. Rosalind was awake before the house when the gray light began at the window. She went down to the kitchen and heated water for herself, then carried her cup out to the front of the house and stood in the early morning under the eave of the porch, looking toward the gate. The Ford Road was no longer visible. Where the lane dipped toward the crossing, there was only water. Brown, broad, and still moving, lapping now at the base of the stone gatepost that marked the entrance to the hall's south drive. She studied the waterline against the post the way she had been studying the river's rise for 2 weeks. She counted the visible inches of stone above the surface. She did the arithmetic. She was still standing there when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. "The fort has gone," Marcus said. "Yes," Rosalind agreed. "The level needs to drop at least 18 inches before it's safe to cross, and it won't drop until the rain stops, which I would not expect before tomorrow at the earliest." Marcus was quiet for a moment beside her. He was looking at the gatepost, too. "I'll have Mrs. Parrish make up a proper room for you," he said finally. "Not the room you used last night." "That was adequate," Rosalind said. "It's the room we use for the night nurse," he said. "You'll have the blue room on the second floor." She turned to look at him, but he had already turned back toward the house, and she found she had nothing to object to that would not have sounded like arguing for its own sake. She followed him inside. She went back up to check on Thomas. Sleeping, his color improved by 2 degrees of decency from what it had been at midnight. And then, because she could not remain still inside a house she did not yet know, she went out again and walked the perimeter of the grounds in the gray light. She walked the east lawn to the boundary wall, then along the wall to the north corner, where a gap in the yew hedge opened toward the river path. She stood at the gap and looked north, where the river ran behind the mill. The water was high there too. She could see, even from this distance, how the mill pond had spread beyond its margins, how the water pressed against the base of the dam wall. The stone face was dark with wet. She stood and looked at it for a long moment, noting what she saw, filing it in the same careful way she filed a patient's symptoms. Then she turned and walked back to the house and went upstairs to check on the boy again, and said nothing to anyone about what she had seen. The first full day at the hall established itself by degrees. Rosalind set up a treatment regimen before breakfast. The tincture on a 4-hour schedule. The camphor cloth changed every 2 hours. The boy to be kept warm but not hot. To be given water whenever he woke and would take it. She wrote the instructions on a sheet of paper and gave it to Mrs. Parrish, who received it with the expression of a woman who has been running a household for 20 years and has not previously been handed written instructions by a village healer not yet 40. The 2 senior housemaids followed Rosalind through the morning with a visible uncertainty about her authority. They did as she asked, but slowly, and with the particular hesitation of people who were waiting for someone to tell them whether they had to. The footman named Giles was the one who hesitated visibly enough to constitute a problem. Rosalind had asked him to carry the small brazier from the corridor into the sick room for warmth, and he had looked at Mrs. Parrish rather than at Rosalind. And Mrs. Parrish had looked at the floor, and the brazier had remained in the corridor. Marcus appeared in the sick room doorway, without Rosalind having heard him coming. "Giles," he said. He said it quietly, without raising his voice, and Giles turned immediately. "Do as Miss Hale says. When she gives an instruction in this house, it is to be followed as you would follow mine. Is that understood?" "Yes, my lord," Giles said, and the brazier was in the sick room within 2 minutes. Rosalind did not thank Marcus for this. She did not think he had done it to be thanked. She noted it, as she noted everything, and went back to her patient. Thomas woke that afternoon for long enough to ask her 3 questions. Was she a witch? Why did her medicine smell like the river? And would he be allowed pudding when he was better? She told him she was not a witch, that her medicine smelled like the river because it was made from plants that grew near water, and that pudding depended on his father. He considered these answers with the gravity of an 8-year-old, and then went back to sleep. She remained in the chair beside his bed, and the afternoon darkened into evening around her, without her particularly noticing. She was not aware of falling asleep. She became aware, at some point, of warmth across her shoulders that had not been there before. A weight of fabric, soft and faintly scented with something she could not immediately name. Cedar and something else, something that had been stored away. She did not open her eyes. She heard the faintest sound from the doorway. Not a footstep exactly, more the absence of one. The pause of someone who had been standing there and then was not. And she understood, without needing to look, what had happened. She kept her eyes closed. The shawl was fine wool, old and well made, and whoever had placed it had tucked the edge carefully around her arm. She did not move for a long time. The second day brought no movement in the boy's condition, neither better nor worse, which Rosalind told herself was acceptable, and told herself again more firmly when she went to the river path for the first time that morning. She walked north as far as the mill, keeping to the higher ground where the path had not yet flooded, and stood looking at the dam for a quarter of an hour. The stain she had noted the previous morning was still there on the stone face. A dark seepage, too high and too wide to be surface water from the rain, running from a point about 2/3 up the wall. She looked at it. She memorized the precise location and the spread. She walked back to the hall and said nothing. She went back to the river path that afternoon and looked again. The stain had spread another hand's width to the left. That evening, the sick room was quiet. Thomas sleeping, the fire low, the candle on the small table between the two chairs burning down steadily. Rosalind was watching the boys breathing, and Marcus was in the other chair, and they had not spoken for perhaps 20 minutes, which was not uncomfortable in the way silences usually were, but simply present, the way the fire was present. "What do you keep looking at by the river?" Marcus asked. Rosalind turned her head toward him. "The water," she said. "I know it's the water," he said. "You've been to the river path twice today. I saw you from the upper window." She looked at him for a moment. His face was open, genuinely asking, and she made a decision that was not quite the full truth, but was not quite a deflection either. "I watch the water level," she said. "It tells me things." "What sort of things?" "Whether the flood will hold or rise," she said. "How long before the ford clears? Whether the drainage upstream is moving as it should." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the candle rather than at her, and she had the distinct impression that he understood more of what she had said than she had intended to give him, and that he was choosing, as she was choosing, not to press the boundary of it. The silence settled again. Outside, the rain continued its steady conversation with the window glass. Thomas shifted in his sleep and made a small sound, and both of them looked at him at the same moment, and then both looked back. Marcus reached across the small bedside table. He did not reach for the medicine bottle or the cloth or anything that was on the table. He put his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of the chair and left it there. His hand was warm and still. Rosalind did not move. She did not speak. She turned her hand over after a moment, so that her palm was against his. And they sat like that in the candlelight, with the sick child between them and the rain against the glass. And neither of them said a word about it, and neither of them needed to. The physician arrived on the third morning, having taken 2 days to come 4 miles through the flood roads, and he was in a fury about it. Dr. Aldworth was 63 years old, stout, and accustomed to being the last word in medical opinion for a radius of 12 miles. He came in through the front door, shedding water from his coat and his hat and his considerable dignity, and he looked at Rosalind standing in the sick room doorway with an expression she recognized from long experience. The expression of a man who had been told, somewhere along the road, that a woman was managing the case. He examined Thomas for 12 minutes. He asked the boy 3 questions. He did not ask Rosalind any. He straightened up and addressed Marcus directly, standing at the foot of the bed with his hands clasped behind him. "The fever is septic in origin," Dr. Aldworth said, "unrelated to the water sickness in the valley, which is a different matter entirely. The boy needs bleeding and a course of calomel to clear the humors. I'll begin this afternoon," Rosalind said, clearly and without raising her voice. "That treatment will kill him." Dr. Aldworth turned to look at her. He did not answer her directly. He looked at Marcus. "My lord, I have been attending this family for 19 years, he said. "I attended Lady Sedgwick. I know this household and I know the boy's constitution. I would ask that we discuss the case privately without..." He paused. Additional opinions. What you're proposing, Rosalind said, addressing Marcus rather than the physician, because that was where the decision lived. Will weaken him faster than the fever. He's already dehydrated. Bleeding him now will collapse his reserves, and calomel in a child this size with this level of infection will damage his gut before it does anything useful. The water sickness downriver is absolutely relevant to his case. The same contamination that is spreading through the valley came through the well water 3 weeks ago. And the boy's symptoms are consistent with that exposure, not with a septic wound or an internal source. You have no formal qualification, Dr. Aldworth said, turning to her now, his voice carrying the particular coldness of a man who has decided to be publicly contemptuous. You are a widow with a basket of herbs. I will not have my diagnosis disputed by. You may dispute my qualification, Rosalind said, but you cannot dispute the boy's symptoms. He has the bowel presentation. He has the specific joint inflammation in the left knee. He has the eye sensitivity that has nothing to do with fever and everything to do with the toxin in the water. Bleed him and purge him, and you will have your answer within 12 hours, and it will not be the answer you want. The room was very quiet. Mrs. Parrish stood in the doorway. 2 maids had frozen in the corridor. Marcus was looking at Rosalind. Miss Hale? He said. Yes, she said. If I follow the doctor's treatment and the boy dies, is that the likely outcome? She held his gaze. It is the probable outcome, yes. Marcus looked at Dr. Aldworth. I'm grateful for your coming through the roads, he said. I know what that journey cost you in these conditions, but I won't be needing your treatment. I'll send for you when the road's clear, and I'll settle your fee then. Dr. Aldworth's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. He settled on cold dignity. You will answer for this, he said, when the boy does not recover. Then I will answer for it, Marcus said. Good day, Dr. Aldworth. The physician left. The front door closed. The sound of his horse on the gravel faded into the rain. Rosalind let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 3 minutes. She turned back to the boy's bed and checked his temperature. And then she straightened and looked at Marcus, who was still standing where he had been, watching her. I cannot promise you he will live, she said. I want to be plain about that. I believe he will, and everything I am doing is directed toward that end. But I am not able to give you certainty. I know, Marcus said, and I need you to obey me, without requiring me to explain every choice I make, she said. There will be moments when I ask you to do something that seems wrong, and I won't have time to argue it through. I need to know that you'll do it. He looked at her steadily. Have you ever been wrong? He asked. The question was not a challenge. It was genuine, and she answered it genuinely. Yes, she said. Once, about my husband. I thought he was strong enough to return to sea after the fever he took in Gibraltar, and he wasn't. And he died of it 4 months later. It is why I no longer guess. I only read what is in front of me. And what is in front of me is a boy whose body I understand, and a treatment I know will work if you let me continue it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, the way a door opens that has been closed for a long time and the hinges are stiff. Tell me what to do, he said. And after that, he did not ask her to explain anything. On the morning of the 3rd day, Rosalind stood at the upper window at the end of the corridor and looked north, and she could see it clearly now. The dark stain on the dam face had spread across the upper third of the wall, and there was a quality to the spread, a slight blooming at the lower edge that told her the water was moving through the stone rather than over it. She had seen a dam fail once before, in the winter of her first year in Elmcroft, when a smaller structure upstream on the Aldwell Brook had gone in the night. She knew what the warning looked like. She knew how long it took. She found Marcus in the corridor outside the boy's room and told him directly. "The dam is failing," she said. "I believe it has been failing for months. The stain on the stone face is seepage from within the wall. The mortar is compromised, probably along the original joint line. If the rain holds another day, the water pressure will exceed what the wall can carry." Marcus did not deny it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away, out the window at the end of the corridor, and she saw something move across his face that was not quite shame and not quite grief, but occupied the space between them. "I knew," he said. Rosalind waited. "The mill's surveyor told me in November," Marcus said. "The repair estimate was £400. There were debts from the year Anne died, medical costs, the second burial, the estate running without proper management for 6 months while I was not managing it. I paid those first. The dam was next. And then next became the following spring. And the following spring became after the harvest. And after the harvest became..." He stopped. "Became never," Rosalind said. "Yes," he said. She did not tell him it was all right, because it was not all right, and she did not think he wanted to be told it was. She said, "I'll need you to move Thomas to the upper floor tonight. Not in the morning. Tonight, after the late check. I want him on the second floor before midnight." "You think it will go tonight?" "I think it will go before dawn," she said. "I could be wrong by a day. I am not willing to be wrong by a day with the boy on the ground floor." Thomas was moved to the upper room at 10 o'clock, wrapped in blankets, half awake and indignant about being carried. His temperature that evening was the highest it had been. Rosalind worked over him for an hour with the camphor cloth and the tincture and every technique she had, and the fever did not move. And Marcus stood at the foot of the bed, and she could feel the stillness of him, the absolute, arrested quality of a man who has used up all his postponements and has nothing left to do but stand and wait. She did not speak to him during that hour. She worked, and near midnight, the boy's temperature began, finally, to fall. "There," she said very quietly. She pressed the back of her wrist to Thomas's forehead and felt the change, not dramatic, not sudden, but real. The heat beginning to yield. "There it is." Marcus sat down heavily in the chair behind him and put his face in his hands, and stayed like that for a moment. Rosalind did not look away and did not pretend she had not seen it. She heard the dam go at 4 in the morning. She had been awake, as she had been awake most of the night, sitting in the chair beside Thomas's bed with the candle burned to its last inch. She heard the river change. Not a crash, not the sound she might have expected, but a deepening, a shift in the water's note from the steady roar of flood to something lower and more absolute, like a door swinging open on a vast dark space. She was on her feet before the sound finished. She went into the corridor, calling out as she moved, "Mrs. Parrish, everyone to the upper floor now. The dam has gone. Move everyone up. Leave everything." And her voice had the quality she had learned from her husband's regiment contacts, the voice that does not require people to think, only to obey. She heard doors opening. She heard feet on the stairs. She went back for Thomas herself. He was awake, his eyes wide and frightened, his fever broken, and his color almost human again. She gathered the blankets around him and told him calmly that they were going to the upper landing because the river had decided to visit, and that it was inconvenient but not dangerous, as long as he stayed with her. He held her hand on the stairs and did not cry. The kitchen passage was already showing water when she came down for the last check. Dark water rising through the gaps between the flagstones, cold and silent and purposeful. She turned back toward the stairs and felt a hand close around her arm, firm and immediate, pulling her clear of the passage entrance as the water surged under the door behind her. Marcus pulled her up the last flight of stairs without releasing her arm, and when they reached the upper landing, where Mrs. Parrish and the maids and the groom and the cook were all assembled in various states of dress, Thomas, sitting on a chest, wrapped in his blankets, looking alert and interested. Marcus did not let go. They stood on the landing with the sound of the water below them, both of them soaked from the spray in the passage, both of them shaking with something that was cold and relief, and the aftermath of 4 days of not sleeping enough. And neither of them released the other's arm. Mrs. Parrish confirmed the household. Everyone was accounted for. Thomas was breathing evenly, his forehead cool under Rosalind's free hand when she reached across to check him. She counted his pulse. It was steady and slow and entirely correct. "He's well," she said. "He's going to be well." Marcus looked at his son for a long moment, and then he looked at Rosalind, and she saw in his face what the 4 days had cost him. All of it. Not just the flood and the fever, but the 2 years before. The accumulated weight of everything he had put off until after. All the afters that had become never. She saw a man who had been holding everything alone for so long that he had forgotten there was any other way to hold it. "Come," he said, and steered her toward the window at the end of the landing, away from the household. They stood at the window with the gray pre-dawn coming up over the flooded grounds. The water was visible below the sill, spread across the kitchen yard, still reflecting the pale sky. The dam was gone. The river had taken what the dam owed it, and now it lay flat and spent across the low ground, and the rain, as if satisfied, had stopped. "Anne died in this house," Marcus said. He said it without preamble, without working up to it, as if he had been carrying the sentence ready for a long time. Childbed fever. The second child didn't survive either. I was in this corridor, that corridor, 1 floor down, for 11 hours while the doctor was with her, and I could not go in and I could not leave, and I could not do anything at all. He stopped. I have not been able to make a decision that cost me something since then. The dam, the repairs to the south field drainage, 3 tenants I should have spoken to about their rent and didn't. I kept thinking there would be a better time, a time when it was easier to act, and there was never a better time. There was only the next delay. Rosalind listened. She did not reach for him, and she did not offer him comfort, because she understood without being told that he was not asking for comfort. He was asking to be heard, which was a different thing entirely. "Thomas's fever," Marcus said. "It's the first thing since Anne that has made me act instead of wait. And even then, I needed you to make me." Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't come to Elmcroft by accident." He turned to look at her. "My husband's old regiment," she said. "He had friends who stayed in correspondence with me after he died. Men who knew the county, who knew the valley. One of them wrote to me in May to say that the dam at Sedgwick Mill was unsound, and that the local physician was too set in his ways to say so publicly, and that the water sickness coming downriver was going to get worse before anyone in authority acknowledged the source. I came to Elmcroft because I wanted to be near enough to watch, and to act when there was something to act on." "You knew," Marcus said, "before the rider came to your door." I knew the dam was failing, she said. I knew the water was contaminated. I was waiting for a case that gave me standing to say so, because without standing, I am a widow with a basket of herbs. She looked at him directly. When your groom knocked on my door, I had already packed my kit. Marcus said nothing for a moment. He looked at her with the same quality of attention he had turned on her in the corridor 4 days ago, when they had first assessed each other. But there was no wariness in it now. There was only the look of a man who has stopped calculating. "Were you going to leave without telling me any of it?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "when the roads cleared." Her voice was steady. "Yes." He was quiet. The water lay still below the window. Somewhere in the house, Thomas said something to the nurse who was watching him. A child's ordinary voice, clear and alive. "Don't leave," Marcus said. Rosalind looked at him. She had prepared, over the past 4 days, several reasonable responses to the several reasonable things he might say to her when the crisis passed. She had not prepared for this, for the plain simplicity of it. 2 words without argument or decoration. A man who had spent 2 years unable to ask for anything, asking for this. She kissed him. She reached up and kissed him first, because she had been the one watching the river for a fortnight. And she had been the one who came prepared. And it seemed right that she should be the one to act. His hands came up to her face, and the dawn came up over the flooded grounds, and the water lay quiet below. And that was how it ended. Not with the flood, but with what the flood had finally made room for. In the days that followed, Marcus rode to the mill with his steward and stood in the mud, looking at what was left of the dam wall. He commissioned the survey that afternoon. He signed the repair contract within the week, committing the estate's remaining liquid reserves, the last of Anne's jointure, which had sat untouched in the account because spending it had felt, for 2 years, like a second burial. He signed the papers without hesitation and did not speak of it again. He also wrote a letter to the village council. Rosalind heard about the letter from Mrs. Parrish, who mentioned it while bringing up the morning tea with the slightly careful expression of a woman delivering information she knows will require a response. "His lordship sent a formal letter to the council yesterday," Mrs. Parrish said, "naming you as physician in residence at the hall with his written endorsement. He's asked them to recognize your care as professional practice, not—" She paused. "Not charitable service." Rosalind set down her cup. She went to find Marcus. He was in the estate room off the library, at the desk, going through the steward's accounts. He looked up when she came in, and she could see in his face that he had been expecting her. "You should have told me before you sent it," she said. "I know," he said. "I would have told you it was the right thing to do," she said. "I would have told you that myself, if you had asked." He met her eyes. "I know," he said again. "Then why didn't you ask?" He leaned back in his chair and looked at her steadily. "Because I didn't think you'd want to be asked," he said. "I thought you'd want it done. And I thought if I asked you, you'd tell me it wasn't necessary. And then I would have had to argue with you about whether it was necessary. And in the meantime, the letter wouldn't have been sent." Rosalind considered this. She pulled the chair from the corner of the room, set it across the desk from him, and sat down. "You are probably correct," she said, "that I would have said it wasn't necessary." "Yes," he said, "and you are correct that it was necessary." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She looked at him across the desk. This man who had sent a letter on her behalf without asking, because he understood that asking would have made her refuse. and she felt something settle in her chest that had been displaced for 4 years. Some counterweight she had removed when she stopped needing to rely on anyone, which had left her precisely balanced, but also permanently alone. "I am not accustomed," she said carefully, "to someone knowing that about me." Marcus said nothing. He did not need to. He simply looked at her, and the look said everything the letter had already said. A week after the flood, the hall's window stood open to a dry June evening. The light came in warm and amber through the upper rooms, and from the garden below came the sound of Thomas's voice, high and clear and argumentative. The voice of a boy who had decided, now that he was entirely recovered, to make up for the days of enforced quiet by being as loud as possible. His nurse's patient replies drifted up between his pronouncements, and the sound of it filled the house in a way that the house had perhaps been missing for 2 years. Rosalind's basket sat beside the door of her room. It had sat there, unpacked, for a week. She had not gone back to Elmcroft. She had not precisely decided not to go. She had simply not gone, and each day the basket had remained where it was, and she had remained where she was, and neither the basket nor she had required explanation. She was in the still room when Marcus found her, going through the herb stores and making notes about what needed replenishing before autumn. She heard him come in. She heard the door close behind him. She did not look up from her inventory immediately. She heard him cross the room. She heard him stop behind her, and she felt the particular quality of attention that she had come to know as specifically his. Not the attention of a man waiting for permission, but the attention of a man who has decided something and is waiting for the right moment to act on it. She set down her pen. She turned. The still room was warm with the evening light coming through its single south-facing window, and it smelled of dried lavender and camphor and the particular clean sharpness of yarrow. Marcus looked at her across the small space between them, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything. And then she stepped forward, and he met her, and the door was already closed. The next morning, summer light lay across the stone sill of the window at the end of the upstairs corridor. 2 cups stood side by side on the sill, the tea in them still warm. Below the window, Thomas's voice rose from the garden. He had discovered something in the flower bed that required immediate investigation and the full attention of his nurse, his dog, and apparently the entire household. The sound of him was unself-conscious and glad, the sound of a child who is simply alive and does not think to be grateful for it because he has never known anything else. Inside the house, Rosalind's basket was no longer by the door of her room. It sat in the cupboard at the end of the corridor, a deep cupboard with a good latch, the kind made to hold things that belong to a house, and it had been placed there with care. Not shoved in hastily, but set on the shelf with her kit beside it. Both of them put away, as things are put away when they have found their proper place and are not expected to leave. Marcus stood at the window with the morning on his face, and Rosalind stood beside him. And below them, Thomas found whatever he had been looking for in the flower bed, and held it up in triumph. Neither Marcus nor Rosalind looked anywhere but forward, at the morning, at the garden, at the boy's upraised hand, at the summer that had arrived while they were not postponing it. The river ran behind the mill, lower now and clear, and the new stone of the dam's repaired face caught the light and held it. And the valley below was quiet, and everything that had been deferred was deferred no longer.